Soft light flickered above Ethan as he drifted between darkness and waking pain, the kind that felt like fire trapped under his skin. Warm and sharp every time he tried to breathe, voices echoed around him, distant and blurry, like they were speaking from behind a thick wall. He couldn't understand the words, but he recognized something familiar in the tone. Urgency mixed with confusion. Then a soft hand touched his forehead and everything inside him calmed for a moment. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened, as if someone had placed a warm blanket over the storm in his body. He opened his eyes slowly and found himself lying on a medical bed inside the human field station, the walls glowing with steady blue lines, machines humming softly. The kind of place where soldiers came back broken and left stitched together. Ethan blinked, struggling to focus, until a small figure came into view beside him, seated on a chair too big for her, legs folded, hands resting quietly in her lap, watching him with wide, glowing eyes. It was the alien girl. Her silver hair was cleaner now, brushed to one side, though still tangled in places. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly under the lights, and her eyes carried that same silent intensity he saw on the battlefield. The mix of fear, relief, and something deeper. She leaned forward the moment he stirred, her voice soft and musical as she whispered a word he didn't understand, a word she had said before he fell unconscious. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat ached. So he swallowed and tried again, his voice rough like broken glass. "You're safe," he whispered, unsure why he felt the need to reassure her. "I'm glad you're safe." The girl's lips trembled, and for a moment she looked like she might cry, but instead she reached toward him and placed 2 fingers gently over the bandaged arrow wound across his chest. A warm pulse flowed from her touch, not painful, not heavy, just warm enough to make his breath catch in surprise. Ethan had seen alien healers before, but this felt different, softer, more instinctive, like she wasn't trying to heal him, but simply trying to ease his suffering. He wanted to ask why she cared so much, but before he could, the door hissed open and a medic stepped inside, stopping when he noticed the girl sitting beside him. "You're awake, good," the medic said, walking over to check the monitors. "You took 4 charged arrows, Ward. You're lucky to be alive." Ethan forced a small nod, his gaze drifting back to the girl. The medic followed his eyes and sighed softly, lowering his voice so only Ethan could hear. "She hasn't left the room since your squad brought her in. She refused to go anywhere else. She even fought the guards when they tried." Ethan stared, surprised, watching her fidget with the loose sleeve of the borrowed medical clothes she now wore. "What's her name?" Ethan asked quietly. "She told us it's Liara," the medic replied, "but that's all she'll say. Every time someone else tries to talk to her, she goes silent. She only communicates with you." Ethan felt something shift inside him, a slow, heavy realization that this wasn't just a rescue. This wasn't just a soldier protecting a civilian. Something deeper had happened on that battlefield, something neither of them understood yet. When the medic left, Liara turned her attention fully to Ethan, her voice soft like a breeze when she finally spoke in broken human language. "You hurt because of me," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Her words cracked with guilt and fear. Ethan shook his head slowly, wincing at the movement. "I don't regret it," he said, his voice gentle. "I would do it again." Liara stared at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a storm of emotions he couldn't read, and then she reached out and held his hand, her touch light, almost unsure, like she was afraid he'd pull away, but he didn't. His hand tightened around hers, warm against her cold fingers, and something silent passed between them, something that felt like trust being born from shared fear. Ethan lay back, taking slow breaths, trying to understand why his heart felt heavier and softer at the same time. "Liara," he said quietly, tasting her name for the first time. "Why were they trying to kill you?" Her body tensed, her fingers gripping his hand tighter, her gaze dropping to the floor as if she feared the walls would hear her secret. She hesitated, struggling with the words. "Rebels want me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I not like them, I not follow war, I run away, they angry. They hunt." Ethan felt a cold ache settle in his chest, not from the wounds, but from the thought of what she had been through alone. "How long were you running?" he asked softly. Liara lifted her eyes slowly, and the sadness in them hit him like another arrow straight to the heart. 3 days, she whispered. "No food, no sleep? Only fear." Ethan exhaled shakily, imagining her tiny frame running through burning fields and dark forests, chased by armed rebels who wanted her dead. He squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now," he said again. But this time it wasn't just reassurance, it was a promise. Liara looked at him with a strange brightness in her eyes. A soft glow he hadn't noticed before, and for a brief moment the room felt warmer, the air lighter, as if something unseen connected them. Then her gaze fell to the bandages across his chest, and she whispered the same alien word she had spoken on the battlefield, a word filled with emotion he still couldn't translate. But it made him feel something. Something powerful, something dangerous, something he didn't yet understand. And as Liara held his hand in silence, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that saving her had changed more than just a single life. It had changed the path of his own fate, a fate that was only beginning to reveal itself. The night outside the field station felt heavier than usual. A thick quiet stretched over the desert plains like a dark blanket, hiding secrets that refused to sleep. And inside the small medical room, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, as Liara sat beside him with her knees drawn close, her glowing eyes fixed on the soft lights above as if she were searching for meaning in them. His wound still burned whenever he breathed, but the pain wasn't what kept him restless. It was something else. Something warm and strange pulsing beneath his skin like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. Every time Liara touched his hand, that warmth grew stronger, running through his chest and down his arm like a gentle current, trying to reach someplace deeper. Ethan didn't know what it meant, but he could feel his body reacting in ways it never had before, as if something inside him was changing slowly, quietly, waiting to reveal itself. Liara noticed him watching her, and her fingers tightened around the edge of her chair, her voice soft and fragile as she whispered, "You feel pain still?" Ethan shook his head slightly, though he could still feel the bruising heat of the arrow wounds beneath the bandages. "I'm fine," he said, letting out a breath. "I've been through worse." Liara lowered her gaze, her long hair falling across her face like a silver curtain, hiding emotions too heavy for someone so young. "You hurt because I run," she whispered. "You hurt because I am danger." Ethan lifted his hand slowly, his muscles aching, and placed it gently over hers. "Liara," he said softly, "you aren't danger. You were the one in danger." Her fingers trembled under his touch, and for a moment the warmth between them grew again, stronger than before, traveling up Ethan's arm in a slow rising wave that made his breath hitch in surprise. "What is that?" he whispered, unable to hide his confusion. Liara pulled her hand back as if frightened of what she had caused, her eyes widening, her breath sharp as she shook her head. "No mean to, no control. It happened when I feel," she whispered, voice cracking. "I try hide, but bond already form." Ethan stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. "Bond," he repeated slowly. "What kind of bond?" Liara looked away, her shoulders curling inward like she was bracing herself for rejection or fear. "My clan have energy inside," she whispered. "When danger come and someone protect us with true heart bond awaken, it connect two life force. It share pain, share feeling, share breath." Ethan froze, the room suddenly feeling too still, too quiet. "You mean," he said slowly.
"You bonded with me," Liara nodded gently.
Guilt filling her eyes like rising water. "Not choose," she whispered. "Instinct, heart feel fear, heart feel your courage. It bind to you without ask." Ethan leaned back against the bed, absorbing the weight of the truth settling inside his chest like a stone dropped into deep water. "So that's why I feel this warmth," he murmured. "That's why my body feels different." Liara nodded again, her voice barely a breath. "When you pain, I pain," she whispered. "When you weak, I weak. When you hurt on field, I scream inside." Ethan's heart clenched at the thought of her experiencing even a fraction of the agony he had felt when the arrows struck him. "You shouldn't have to feel that," he said quietly. "It's not fair." Liara shook her head slowly, eyes shining with something tender and fragile. "You protect me," she whispered. "Fair is feeling your pain so you not alone." Her words hit him harder than any weapon, because they weren't just emotional, they were raw, honest, full of a depth he didn't expect from someone who had spent days running for her life. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't speak at all. He just watched her, feeling that strange warmth again pulsing inside him, rising and falling with her breath. A sudden alarm echoed faintly in the distance, not loud enough to cause panic, but enough to remind Ethan that the world outside their small room was far from safe. Liara stiffened, her fingers gripping the chair tightly, her eyes glowing brighter as she looked toward the door as if she sensed something no human could feel. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Liara swallowed hard, the glow around her pupils flickering nervously. "Rebels near," she whispered. "Too near, their minds full of hunt. They search for me." Ethan felt cold air run up his spine. "How do you know?" he whispered. Liara pressed her small hand against her chest. Over her heart, "Bond make my senses strong," she said. "I feel danger, I feel anger near. I feel they want me back." Ethan pushed himself upright despite the pain, his instincts snapping awake. "They're coming here," he said, his voice tightening. Liara nodded with a slow, trembling breath. "They come for me, they come soon. They follow energy trace. They know I bind to human." Ethan clenched his jaw, his soldier's mind racing as he reached for the edge of the bed to stand, ignoring the burning pain slicing through his ribs. "You're not going back," he said, his voice firm, carrying a strength that surprised even him. "I won't let them take you." Liara looked at him with wide, trembling eyes filled with worry and a flicker of hope she didn't dare trust. "You hurt," she whispered. "You not strong enough." Ethan steadied himself on his feet, breathing hard, the warmth from the bond spreading through him like a quiet fire, giving him strength he shouldn't have. "I don't care," he said. "I'll stand anyway." Liara reached out and touched his forearm, and the moment her skin met his, the warmth flared inside both of them, like two heartbeats syncing for a brief moment. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Then I stand with you." And in that small, quiet room, with danger closing in and fear pressing on their chests, something powerful settled between them, something unspoken but undeniable, a promise forged from pain, courage, and a bond neither of them fully understood yet. A bond that was growing stronger with every breath they shared. And outside in the darkness of the desert, the rebels moved closer, drawn by the very energy that now tied Ethan and Liara together. A storm was coming and neither of them could escape it. But for the first time, they weren't facing it alone. The desert night trembled with a quiet that felt wrong, a silence too sharp, too thin, as if the air itself was waiting for something to break. And inside the small field station, Ethan felt that tension sinking deep into his bones as he stood beside Liara. His breath tight, his wounds burning, but his resolve even stronger. Liara stood close to him, her silver hair brushing his arm as she listened to something he couldn't hear. Her glowing eyes focused on the world outside the window with a fear that stirred something protective in his chest. "Rebels near," she whispered again, her voice trembling like a leaf caught in wind. "They follow bond energy. They feel me like echo." Ethan tightened the strap of his vest, ignoring the sharp sting running through the healing wounds under his bandages. The arrows that hit him had cut deep, but the thought of leaving Liara unprotected cut even deeper. "We need to move," Ethan said softly, glancing at the dim hallway beyond the door. "If they track the energy, they'll find this room first." Liara swallowed hard, her small hands lifting to her heart as if trying to muffle something inside her chest. "I try hide bond," she whispered, "but fear make it bright." A call to them. Ethan stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth pulse through both of them like a shared heartbeat. "It's not your fault," he whispered. "You're not the reason danger is coming. The rebels are." Liara looked up at him with eyes full of guilt and uncertainty. "You saved me," she whispered. "Now danger follow you." Ethan shook his head slowly. "I saved you because it was the right thing," he said, "not because I expected safety afterward." For a moment, Liara simply stared at him, something deep shifting behind her glowing eyes, something soft and strong at the same time. But then the moment shattered as the distant sound of metal clashing echoed outside, faint but unmistakable. Ethan's instincts sharpened instantly. "That's them," he murmured. "We don't have time." He reached for her hand without thinking, and the moment their palms touched, a deep warmth surged through them, stronger than before, like their very breath fused together for a heartbeat. Liara gasped softly but didn't pull away, instead letting him guide her toward the back exit of the station, every step carrying a fragile mixture of trust and fear. The hallways were dim and nearly empty, flickering lights casting long shadows across the walls, the station sleeping except for a few distant guards who had no idea death was creeping closer. Through the sand outside, Ethan's boots thudded softly against the metal floor, each step echoing in the stillness as Liara moved beside him with light. Silent steps, her bare feet barely making a sound. Suddenly she stopped, her breath catching in her throat as her eyes flickered with bright alarm. "They close," she whispered, "too close. They enter building." Ethan froze, his pulse quickening as he listened, straining his ears until he heard it too. Faint footsteps in the distance, heavy and coordinated, the kind that did not belong to humans. The rebels had breached the station. Ethan pulled Liara into a narrow storage corridor, pressing his back to the wall as he peeked around the corner, his breath slow and controlled. Shadowy figures moved at the end of the hall, tall forms with armor that shimmered with dark red light, their movements precise, their weapons raised, their glowing eyes scanning for any sign of the girl they hunted. Liara clutched Ethan's arm, trembling as she whispered, "They feel me, they smell bond energy. They know I close." Ethan placed a gentle hand over hers, steadying her trembling fingers. "Then we stay ahead of them," he murmured. "Stay close to me." She nodded, taking a shaky breath as he guided her deeper into the shadows. They slipped through a side door, down a metal staircase, and out onto the deserted loading bay behind the station, the cold night air rushing over them as sand whispered across the ground. The moon hung low above them, casting silver light across the desert, and the open expanse made Ethan's heart race because out here they had no walls. Nothing to hide behind if the rebels caught up. Liara stepped forward slowly, her eyes glowing brighter as she closed her eyes and felt the energy around them. "Forest north," she whispered, pointing toward the dark line of trees in the distance. "Trees hide bond better, shadows hide scent." Ethan nodded. "Then that's where we go." They moved quickly across the sand, Ethan keeping Liara close as they ran toward the forest, the sound of footsteps growing louder behind them, rebels emerging from the station like shadows breaking loose from the dark. A shot of red light streaked past them, hitting the sand just inches from Ethan's foot, sending a bright burst of heat into the air.
"They see us," Liara cried softly, her voice shaking.
Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her into a sprint, his wounded legs burning but refusing to slow. "Just a little farther," he breathed. "Keep running." The forest loomed closer, dark branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers, offering shelter that felt both eerie and safe. They crossed into the first line of trees, leaves whispering overhead as the darkness swallowed them whole. Liara stumbled, exhaustion weakening her legs, but Ethan caught her before she fell, steadying her with both hands. "You're okay," he whispered, breathing hard. "Just breathe." She leaned into him, tears glazing her glowing eyes. "I slow you," she whispered. "I weak. You hurt because of me again." Ethan lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're not weak," he said softly. "You're alive." "And that's what matters," Liara trembled, the bond between them pulsing with emotion so strong it felt like it echoed through his heart. Behind them, the rebels entered the forest, their glowing armor flickering between the trees, but Ethan tightened his hold on her hand. "We'll survive this," he whispered. "Together." And as the darkness deepened and danger closed in, the bond between them glowed brighter than the fear surrounding them, a bond that was no longer just accidental instinct but something growing into destiny, something powerful enough to change the war itself. The forest swallowed the world in thick shadows as Ethan and Liara pushed deeper between the trees, every step sending leaves whispering under their feet, every breath filled with the cold scent of earth and night, the kind of silence that carried danger like an unseen pulse. Ethan kept his injured arm tight against his ribs, each movement sending a slow throb of pain through him, but he didn't let it show. He didn't let himself slow, because behind them the rebels were spreading through the forest like wolves tracking a wounded deer, their glowing armor flickering between branches, their footsteps rhythmic and relentless. Liara stayed close beside him, her hand gripping his with a desperate strength that surprised him, her glowing eyes wide as she listened to the forest with senses he could barely understand. "Many," she whispered, her breath trembling. "5, maybe more. They follow fast, they angry, their minds loud with hunt." Ethan tightened his jaw, pulling her gently but firmly as they moved deeper. "We need cover," he murmured, "somewhere narrow, somewhere defensible." But the forest around them stretched endlessly, tall dark trunks twisting upward like ancient pillars holding up the night sky. No shelter, no structure, no place to make a stand that wouldn't expose them completely. Suddenly, Liara stopped, her fingers tightening around his hand, her breath catching like a flame in wind. "Energy there," she whispered, pointing toward a darker patch deeper between the trees. "Old place, old stones, I feel it call." Ethan wasn't sure what she sensed, but desperate options were better than no options. So he nodded and followed her lead, trusting her instincts even if he didn't fully understand them. Branches brushed against their sides as they moved into a narrow passage of trees, the ground sloping downward until the forest opened into a small hidden valley, where ancient stone pillars stood half-buried beneath moss and vines. The air felt different here, heavier, charged, humming faintly with a strange warmth that made Ethan's skin prickle as if invisible electricity moved through the air. Liara stepped forward slowly, her eyes widening as she reached out toward one of the cracked stone pillars, "This is temple ground," she whispered with awe and fear blending in her voice. "My people built long time ago. Before war, before rebels, energy here is old, strong, sleeping." Ethan looked around, taking in the circular layout of the stones, the way the trees bent outward as if afraid to grow too close, the ground smooth and almost glowing under the moonlight. "Can it help us?" he asked. Scanning the dark shapes in the trees behind them, Liara hesitated, placing both hands on the stone as if listening to something deep inside it. "I'm not sure," she whispered, "but energy can hide us for a short moment. Maybe confuse rebels, maybe slow them." Ethan nodded. Even a short moment could mean survival. He stepped closer to her, but before he could speak, the sound of cracking branches echoed sharply behind them. The rebels moving faster, their voices low and cold as they tracked the faint glow of Liara's bond energy, like predators following heat in darkness. Liara flinched at the sound, her fear rippling through their bond so strongly Ethan felt it as a pressure inside his chest. "We can't run anymore," Ethan whispered, stepping in front of her, his body instinctively positioning itself between her and danger, just like on the battlefield. "We stand here." Liara's breath hitched as she looked at him, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You will die if you fight now. You hurt, you bleed inside. Bond, show me your pain." Ethan took her hand and squeezed it gently. "I'd rather die protecting you than watch them take you," he said, his voice steady with a calm he didn't feel. "I made a promise." Liara's eyes shimmered with tears that reflected the moonlight like tiny stars, her small fingers trembling as she held on to him. "You saved me once," she whispered, "but now I save you too. I not let you fall for me again." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the forest around them shifted, shadows moving, branches bending as rebels stepped into the valley, red armor glowing in the darkness like burning embers come to life. Their leader, taller and more heavily armored than the rest, stepped forward with a staff pulsing with dark energy, his voice echoing with cold threat. "Give us the girl," he growled, "and you may die quickly." Liara stepped behind Ethan, but her hand remained tightly wrapped around his, the bond between them burning warm enough that even the cold night air couldn't smother it. Ethan stood tall, ignoring the tremor in his legs, ignoring the heat of the wounds flaring through him. "You're not touching her," he said, his voice low. "Not while I'm still breathing?" The rebel leader laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the air. "You already bleed for her once." "Human," he snarled. "She is weapon of our people. She belongs to us." Liara flinched, whispering softly, "I not weapon, I not want war. I want peace." Her voice trembled, but her eyes glowed with a strength Ethan hadn't seen before, a flicker of the power she carried inside her. The rebel leader raised his staff and the energy on its tip crackled like lightning. Ethan stepped forward, raising his arms to shield Liara even though he knew the weapon could break him in a heartbeat. He didn't care. If this was the moment he died, it would be facing danger head-on, protecting the girl who gave meaning to the scars on his body and the warmth beating inside his chest. But before the rebel commander could strike, the ancient stones around them began to glow, slow at first, then brighter, pulsing with the same strange warmth Ethan had felt since their bond formed. Liara gasped, gripping Ethan's arm with both hands.
"Temple wake," she whispered. "It feel us, it feel bond."
Hit answer. The ground trembled, the air thickening with rising energy. The old temple responding to the life force connection between human and alien, as if awakening from centuries of sleep. The rebels hesitated, fear flickering in their glowing eyes as the pillars brightened with light that grew stronger with every heartbeat Ethan and Liara shared. Ethan didn't know what was happening, but he held Liara close, trusting her, trusting whatever ancient power was rising around them. And in that moment, as the temple's light filled the valley and the rebels braced themselves for something they didn't understand, Ethan felt fate shift like a tide turning in the dark. Something powerful was coming. Something tied not to war but to the bond between them. A bond stronger than fear, stronger than pain, stronger than the darkness closing in. The ancient valley pulsed with rising light as if the earth itself had awakened from centuries of sleep. The stone pillars glowing brighter with every breath Ethan and Liara took, their shared bond fueling something old and powerful beneath the ground. And for a moment even the rebels hesitated, unsure whether they were standing before magic or death. Ethan stood in front of Liara with his body tense and ready, his wounds burning, his breath uneven, but his eyes steady because nothing, not pain, not fear, not death itself could make him step away from her now. Liara's hands pressed gently against his back, trembling not from weakness but from the overwhelming power humming beneath her skin, the bond within her glowing so fiercely she could barely breathe as waves of warm energy rushed through her chest and into him. The rebel commander lifted his weapon again, his voice echoing with rage that cracked through the air like thunder. "She belongs to us," he snarled. "Her blood carries the key to awaken the ancient weapon, and with her power we will rule every world." Liara shook her head with fear and defiance intertwining like two flames fighting against the wind. "I not your weapon," she whispered, her voice shaking yet strong. "I not bring death to galaxies." Ethan stepped forward, muscles screaming in protest, his body threatening to fall but his heart refusing to let him. "She's with me," he said, voice low and steady like a held blade. "And you're not taking her." A ripple of energy surged through the pillars at his words, as if the temple recognized his promise and answered. Light flowing across the ground like a living river, the rebel commander growled and signaled his soldiers, their red glowing armor lighting up as they advanced. Weapons pointed at Ethan's chest. Liara gasped as she felt the threat through the bond, her hands shaking violently. "They hurt you, I feel it," she whispered. "If they break you, I break too." Ethan turned his head slightly, giving her a small soft smile even through the pain. "Then they won't," he said. "Not while I'm standing." The first rebel lunged, and Ethan moved with instinct sharpened by desperation, blocking the strike, twisting the attacker's arm, driving him back, the pain in his ribs burning like fire. But he fought through it with a strength that didn't come from muscles alone. Liara felt every strike through the bond, felt every burst of pain echoing through her own chest, and yet she didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, lifting her hands toward him, her voice trembling as she whispered ancient words her ancestors once used to protect those they trusted with their lives. Her palms glowed with soft blue light that spread across Ethan's back like a cloak, warming his skin, feeding his strength, giving him enough breath to keep fighting even as the world spun around him. Another rebel charged, and Ethan fought him with renewed force, moving like a man possessed by destiny itself. Each punch, each block, each step fueled by Liara's energy flowing into him as if their heartbeats had merged into one. But the rebels were many, and Ethan was only one man. His body weakening with each clash, his lungs burning, his legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion. The rebel commander watched with cold amusement, lowering his staff as he aimed its glowing tip directly at Liara. "If the human will not fall," he sneered, "I will simply break the girl." Liara screamed as she felt the deadly intention, the energy in the air shifting violently. "No!" Ethan shouted, spinning toward her even as another rebel struck him across the back, pain exploding through him like a lightning storm. His knees buckling, his vision blurring, Liara rushed forward, tears streaming down her glowing cheeks, her hands reaching out for him as the bond flared with overwhelming terror. "Ethan," she cried, "stop fighting, you die. You die for me." Ethan collapsed to one knee, his breath ripped from his chest. "If it keeps you alive," he whispered through clenched teeth. "It's worth it." Liara fell beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed them to his wounds, the bond surging so violently it felt like their hearts were beating inside the same body. The ground beneath them trembled, the temple pillars glowing brighter as if feeding on their shared desperation. The rebel commander laughed and aimed his weapon at them both. "This ends now," he declared. Liara's eyes widened with terror and love and something ancient all at once, her body trembling as she felt Ethan slipping, his strength fading, the bond flickering like a dying flame. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking like glass. "I not lose him, not again. Not ever." She pressed both hands to Ethan's chest, and the bond exploded with light so bright it turned the entire valley into a glowing ocean of blue warmth. Liara screamed, not in fear but in awakening, her voice filled with ancient power that had slept inside her blood for generations. The temple responded, the ground shaking as energy rose from deep beneath the earth, swirling around them like a living storm, wrapping Ethan in warmth and lifting him from the ground. Every wound on his body glowed as Liara's life force fused with his, pouring strength into him even as her own body weakened, her breath trembling, her legs shaking under the weight of so much power. The rebel commander staggered back, fear replacing pride. "This is impossible," he whispered. "She was never supposed to awaken this." Liara's voice rose into the trembling air, soft but powerful enough to fill the valley. "You try use me for war," she said, "but Bond choose peace, Bond choose life. Bond choose him." The light burst outward in a wave that threw the rebels to the ground, their weapons flickering out, their armor dimming as the temple's ancient energy stripped the hatred from their minds like dust being blown off old stone. Ethan gasped as he landed back on the ground, his body trembling but alive, his wounds glowing faintly as they slowly closed. Liara collapsed into his arms, exhausted, trembling, her breath soft and uneven as she whispered one final word full of love, fear, and devotion. Ethan. He held her close, his heart racing with the realization that she had nearly destroyed herself to save him, and in the fading glow of the ancient temple, he understood that this bond was no longer an accident. It was fate, a fate that had nearly cost everything, and would soon demand even more. The blinding blue light slowly faded from the valley as the ancient temple sank back into silence, the ground still warm beneath Ethan's knees as he held Liara against his chest, her breathing soft and fragile like a flickering candle fighting to stay alive. And in that moment the entire world narrowed to the weight of her small body trembling in his arms. Ethan pressed his forehead gently to hers, his breath shaky, the glow of her power still lingering on his skin, like a warm echo of everything she had poured into him. Liara, he whispered, voice breaking with emotion he could barely contain. Stay with me, please stay. Her eyes fluttered open, their soft blue glow dimmer than before but still full of warmth, full of trust, full of a bond he now understood was deeper than anything he had known. I hear, she whispered weakly, her fingers curling around the edge of his vest. I stay because you live. Ethan swallowed hard, guilt and gratitude twisting inside him until he could barely breathe. You almost died, he murmured. You gave me everything you had. Liara shook her head slowly, her voice fragile but steady. I not give, she whispered. Bond give, heart give. Temple only listen. Her words hit him like a soft whisper of truth carried by destiny itself, and he held her tighter as if he could protect her not just from danger, but from the cost of her own power. Around them the rebels stirred on the ground, their armor cracked and dimmed, the fire in their eyes replaced by disorientation and fear, the ancient temple's energy having stripped away the rage that once fueled them. The rebel commander struggled to his feet, stumbling as if the weight of his own hatred had been lifted so suddenly he didn't know how to stand without it. He stared at Ethan and Liara, his voice trembling with something that wasn't anger anymore. What have you done? He whispered. What power is this? Liara turned her head slightly, resting weakly in Ethan's arms as she looked at the commander with eyes full of sadness and something almost gentle. Not weapon power, she whispered. Bond power, life power, what you try to use for war. You never understand. The commander stepped back as if the truth in her words pushed him like wind, his expression crumbling under the weight of everything he had believed. Ethan slowly stood, lifting Liara with him, her weight light, her body warm but shaking from the strain of everything she had unleashed. He faced the rebels with a steady gaze, the strength in his stance not from anger, but from the unbreakable decision carved into every scar on his body. This ends here, Ethan said, his voice calm and final. No more chasing her, no more using her, no more war through her blood. The rebel commander hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon, the red glow fading completely as his soldiers did the same, their eyes lowering in surrender not out of defeat, but realization. We will not take her, the commander said quietly. We saw what she is now. She is not ours to claim. Liara's fingers tightened around Ethan's vest as relief washed through her like a trembling wave that he felt through the bond. Ethan nodded once, then turned away from the rebels, his focus returning entirely to the fragile girl in his arms. We need to get you somewhere safe, he whispered, his voice softening as he brushed her hair away from her face. You need rest, real rest, not the kind you get while running for your life. Liara leaned into him, her cheek resting against his shoulder, her breath slow and warm against his neck. I safe with you, she whispered. Everywhere safe with you. Ethan felt a quiet ache in his chest, something tender and powerful blooming inside him with each word she spoke. He carried her through the forest as dawn began to rise, pale golden light pushing aside the night, the world slowly brightening as birds began to stir in the branches above. Liara's eyes softened at the sight of the first warm rays touching the leaves. Light feel different now, she whispered. Feel warm like bond. Ethan smiled faintly, his voice low. Maybe because you're free now. Liara gazed at him, her eyes filling with emotion so pure it made his heart tighten. You free me, she whispered. You saved me twice, maybe more. Ethan shook his head softly. We saved each other, he murmured. That's what the bond really did. They reached the edge of the forest where a transport shuttle waited. Human soldiers standing guard with stunned expressions as they saw Ethan carrying the very alien child he had taken arrows for. But instead of questioning him, they stepped aside, their eyes full of respect, full of the kind of awe that comes from witnessing something greater than orders or uniforms. Ethan carried Liara into the shuttle, settling her gently onto a padded seat as she leaned against him, her small hand never letting go of his. As the engines hummed to life and the shuttle rose into the morning sky, Liara looked out the window with a soft whisper escaping her lips. "What now?" she asked, voice quiet and full of uncertainty. Ethan looked at the horizon stretching wide and endless before them, then down at the girl whose bond was forever tied to his own heartbeat. "Now," he said softly, "we go forward. Together." Liara's eyes shimmered with warmth as she rested her head on his shoulder. "Together," she whispered back. "I like that word." The shuttle soared higher, leaving behind the forest, the rebels, the ruins, and the pain, carrying them toward a future neither fully understood but both were ready to face. And as the sun rose brighter, spilling gold across the clouds, Ethan looked at the scars on his arms. Scars earned the day he stepped in front of flying arrows. And he knew with absolute certainty that every wound had been worth it. Because they had led him to her, to a bond that shocked the galaxy, to a destiny written not by war but by the courage to protect one small frightened girl who had now become the center of his fate. And in the warmth of that rising sun, their new story quietly began,